The council chamber was full when Danny Caldwell walked in. Word of the attack had traveled fast, and every ambassador in the Athavarn Spire had come to see what would happen next. The gallery above the main floor was packed with observers, journalists, and diplomatic staff from dozens of species. The air hummed with whispered conversations in 100 different languages, all of them saying the same thing. The Veldari had attacked a human colony. The youngest species in the council had just been struck by the most powerful. Danny walked to the central podium. He did not hurry. He did not look nervous. He carried a small data tablet in his hand, and when he reached the podium, he set it down gently and looked out across the chamber. 400 species looked back at him. Some with eyes, some with sensors, some with organs he did not have a name for. All of them were waiting. At 1400 hours, Galactic Standard Time, a Veldari war fleet of approximately 900 vessels had entered the Kepler 442 system without warning or provocation. They had destroyed the orbital defense platforms, bombarded civilian population centers on the surface, and engaged the small human garrison stationed in orbit. The colony of New Haven, home to over 60,000 men, women, and children, was burning. Casualties were still being counted, but early estimates suggested that at least 12,000 people were already dead. Danny paused and let that number sit in the room. 12,000! He watched the faces of the ambassadors and saw discomfort on some, indifference on others, and something close to satisfaction on a few. He noted each reaction carefully and filed it away in a part of his mind that would not forget. Then he invoked the Mutual Defense Compact. It was one of the founding documents of the Galactic Council, written over 6,000 years ago by species that no longer existed. It stated, in plain language, that any member species subjected to an unprovoked military attack could call upon the full membership of the Council for assistance. It was not a suggestion. It was a binding obligation. The chamber went very quiet. Danny asked the Council, formally and clearly, to authorize a joint military response against the Veldari Dominion, in accordance with the compact. He asked for ships, supplies, and strategic support. He asked for justice. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. Then, one by one, the elder races responded. The Cathari Collective abstained, citing economic ties with the Veldari that they could not afford to sever. The Drenath Federation expressed deep concern, but said their fleet was committed to border patrols and could not be redeployed. The Marathi hegemony simply said no. The Veldari were too strong, and the risk was too great. Speaker after speaker rose and gave their reasons, and every reason amounted to the same thing. Humanity was not worth the trouble. Danny stood at the podium and listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. When the last speaker sat down, he picked up his data tablet and said, "I understand. Humanity will remember this as well." Then he walked out of the chamber. In the corridor outside, the Orethi ambassador was waiting for him. Councillor Sivon was a tall, thin being, with translucent skin and large dark eyes that always looked a little sad. Her species lived on water worlds and were known for their empathy and their cautious diplomacy. She had always been one of the few aliens who treated Danny with genuine kindness. She fell into step beside him and spoke quietly. She said that her people wanted to help, but could not act alone against the Veldari. She said something that Danny would think about for a long time afterward. The galaxy does not fight for the small, Ambassador. It only respects the strong. I wish it were different, but it is not. Danny thanked her. He meant it. Then he returned to his quarters and opened a secure channel to Earth. Back in the Kepler 442 system, Captain Nick Holland was fighting the most desperate battle of his life. His 12 ships had been reduced to 8, in the first 3 hours of combat. The Veldari fleet was enormous, and their weapons hit hard. But Nick had one advantage. He knew the system better than they did, and he used every piece of it. The Kepler 442 system had a dense asteroid belt between its third and fourth planets, a field of tumbling rock and ice that stretched for millions of kilometers. Nick pulled his ships into the belt and used the asteroids as cover, darting out to strike at Veldari patrols and then vanishing back into the debris before the larger ships could target them. It was not a winning strategy. It was a surviving strategy. And surviving was all that mattered right now, because every hour Nick stayed in the fight was another hour for the civilian transports on the surface to load passengers and lift off. Lieutenant Megan Price had become the heart of the operation. She sat at her console for 18 hours straight, tracking Veldari patrol patterns and calculating attack windows down to the second. She ran on coffee and adrenaline and a quiet fury that she kept carefully contained behind her professional calm. When Nick asked her how she was holding up, she said, "I will be fine when those transports are clear, sir." The transports launched in waves. Cargo shuttles, passenger liners, mining haulers, anything that could fly and carry people. They lifted off from the northern continent, where the Veldari bombardment had been lightest, and burned hard for the system's edge. Nick's ships covered their escape, drawing Veldari attention away from the fleeing civilians whenever they could. They lost 4 more ships in the process. The destroyer Keen Edge took a direct hit to its reactor and broke apart. The frigate Morning Star was swarmed by Veldari interceptors and torn to pieces. 2 more ships were damaged beyond repair and had to be abandoned. Their crews were picked up by the remaining vessels, packed into corridors and cargo bays like sardines. By the time it was over, Nick had 4 ships left out of 12, but nearly 40,000 civilians had made it out. 40,000 people who would have died if he had turned and run at the start. Nick gave the order to retreat. His ships limped toward the nearest human-controlled system, battered and bleeding, but alive. As they jumped to faster-than-light speed, Nick took one last look at the Kepler 442 system on his view screen. The colony of New Haven was a smear of smoke and fire on the planet's surface. The western plains were black. The rivers were gone. He turned away from the screen and said nothing. On Earth, the emergency session of the Security Council had been running for 6 hours. General Leo Swanson stood before a room full of the most powerful people on the planet and laid out the situation with the blunt honesty that had defined his career. The Veldari had committed an act of war. The Galactic Council had refused to intervene. Humanity was alone, and by every public measure of military strength, it was outmatched by a factor of 40 to 1. The room was grim. Some faces showed fear, some showed anger. A few showed nothing at all, which was often worse. President Alan Whitfield sat at the head of the table and listened to everything. He was a quiet man by nature, not given to speeches or dramatic gestures. He had been a school principal before entering politics, and he still carried himself with the patient calm of someone used to dealing with difficult situations, one step at a time. When General Swanson finished his briefing, the president looked around the room. Then he asked one question. "What do they not know about us?" The room went still. General Swanson met the president's eyes, and for the first time in a very long day, he smiled. "Everything, sir," he said. "They do not know a single damn thing." The president nodded slowly. "Then I think it is time we introduced ourselves properly. 11 years ago, when that first alien trading vessel tumbled out of faster-than-light travel and nearly hit the moon, humanity learned something that changed everything. The galaxy was full of life, and almost none of it was friendly. The crew of the Rithari trading ship were polite enough. They shared star charts, basic translation protocols, and a rough overview of galactic politics before continuing on their way. But the picture they painted was not a comforting one. The galaxy was a hierarchy. The oldest and most powerful species sat at the top, and everyone else existed at their pleasure. New species were welcomed into the council with smiles and handshakes, and then quietly exploited, taxed, or absorbed into the territories of their stronger neighbors. Those who resisted were crushed. Those who complained were ignored. The strong did what they wished, and the weak endured what they must. Earth's leaders saw this clearly, and they made a decision that would define the next decade of human history. They would not reveal their true strength. They would not show the galaxy what humanity was capable of. Instead, they would play the role of a small, modest, unremarkable species, just smart enough to be interesting, and just weak enough to be ignored. And while the galaxy looked the other way, humanity would prepare. The project was called Longbow, and it was the most ambitious secret in human history. Deep beneath the red dust of Mars, in a network of tunnels and caverns that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, a city had been built. It did not appear on any public record. No satellite could see it. No alien sensor had ever detected it. Longbow Station was humanity's hidden forge, and for 11 years it had been burning hot. Pam Shelton had been part of Longbow from the very beginning. She was a short woman with gray hair and sharp eyes who had spent her career building things that other engineers said were impossible. She had designed the first human fusion reactor at the age of 31. She had cracked the problem of artificial gravity at 35. And for the last 11 years, she had been building warships. Not the small, modest patrol vessels that humanity showed to the galaxy. Those were real, but they were the least of what Longbow had produced. The real fleet was something else entirely. General Leo Swanson arrived at Longbow Station by underground shuttle from the surface base at Olympus Mons. He had been here many times before, but the sights still impressed him. The main construction bay was a cavern nearly 2 kilometers long, lit by rows of industrial floodlights that turned the red stone walls white. And filling that cavern, row after row after row, were warships, 312 of them. Pam met him at the entrance to the bay and walked with him along the central gantry, pointing out the different classes as they passed. Frigates, built for speed, with engines twice as powerful as anything the Valdari used. Destroyers armed with plasma cannons that could punch through shields designed to stop weapons 3 times their size. Cruisers with layered armor systems that could take a beating and keep fighting. And at the far end of the bay, towering above everything else like mountains of steel and purpose, the Colossus-class dreadnoughts. There were 7 of them. Each one was nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, and wrapped in armor plating that Pam had personally designed using a composite material the galaxy had never seen. They were the most powerful warships humanity had ever built. And they were beautiful in the way that a thunderstorm is beautiful, full of contained violence waiting to be released. Pam explained the key advantage that made the fleet special. Every warship in the galaxy, from every species, was built around fixed weapon systems. A ship designed for long-range combat carried long-range weapons. A ship designed for close-range brawling carried short-range weapons. This was how it had always been done, and no one questioned it, because no one had ever found a reason to. Humanity had found a reason. Every ship in the Longbow fleet was equipped with modular weapon systems that could be reconfigured mid-battle. A destroyer could switch from plasma cannons to kinetic batteries in under 90 seconds. A cruiser could shift from defensive screen projectors to offensive torpedo launchers without returning to port. This meant that every human ship was effectively 3 or 4 ships in one. An enemy that prepared to fight a long-range fleet would suddenly find itself facing a close-range brawler. An enemy that spread out to avoid torpedo volleys would be hit with concentrated beam weapons instead. No one in the galaxy had ever done this, because no one in the galaxy thought the way humans thought. Alien military doctrine was built on tradition, on doing things the way they had been done for thousands of years. Human military doctrine was built on one simple principle: win by any means necessary, and if the current means are not working, change them immediately. General Swanson nodded as Pam finished her briefing. He had heard it all before, but hearing it again made him feel something he had not felt in days: hope. The next step was choosing who would lead the fleet into battle. Colonel Katie Morgan was the obvious choice, and Swanson had already made up his mind before he even asked. Katie was 41 years old, tall, composed, and possessed of a tactical mind that had earned her the quiet respect of every officer who had ever served under her. She did not raise her voice. She did not make dramatic speeches. She simply looked at a problem, found its weakest point, and applied force until it broke. Katie assembled her command staff in the briefing room at Longbow Station. Commander Derek Lane would lead the vanguard, the fast attack group that would hit the enemy first and hardest. Derek was young, aggressive, and had a gift for reading a battle the way some people read music, instinctively and without hesitation. Lieutenant Commander Heather Dunn would coordinate fleet communications, a job that sounded simple, but was actually one of the most critical roles in any engagement. Heather was calm under pressure, precise in her language, and had a memory that bordered on inhuman. And then there was Captain Nick Holland. Nick had arrived back in the solar system 2 days ago with his 4 surviving ships and 40,000 rescued civilians. He had not slept in 72 hours. He had lost 8 ships and hundreds of crew members. He had watched a colony burn. When Katie offered him command of the dreadnought Pale Horse, he did not hesitate. He said yes before she finished the sentence. President Whitfield addressed the fleet in a closed broadcast from the White House Situation Room. He kept it short. He said that for 11 years, humanity had chosen to appear weak. It had been a strategic decision, and it had served its purpose. But the time for pretending was over. The Veldari had killed their people. Now, it was time for the galaxy to learn what humanity really was. The fleet launched at dawn, Earth time. 312 warships rose from concealed docks beneath the surface of Mars, from hidden hangars in the moons of Jupiter, from stations buried in the asteroid belt that had been disguised as mining platforms. They emerged into open space like a tide rising, one after another, until the void between Mars and Jupiter was filled with steel and light. The formation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not a rigid battle line or a defensive sphere. It was fluid, layered, and constantly shifting, like a living thing breathing in the dark. At its heart, the 7 Colossus-class dreadnoughts moved in a slow, deliberate formation that radiated quiet menace. Katie Morgan stood on the bridge of her flagship, the dreadnought Iron Summit, and watched the fleet come together on her tactical display. 312 green dots, each one representing a warship crewed by men and women who knew exactly what they were flying into and had volunteered anyway. She opened a channel to the fleet. Her voice was steady and clear. "All ships, this is Colonel Morgan. Set course for the Gliese 667 system. We are going to introduce ourselves." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed and vanished from the solar system in a ripple of blue-white light. Behind them, Earth turned slowly in the dark, and for the first time in 11 years, it was no longer hiding. The Gliese 667 system had 3 stars locked in a slow gravitational dance, and the Veldari had chosen it as their forward staging ground for good reason. The triple star system created a natural web of gravitational corridors that made it easy to jump in and hard to jump out, a perfect bottleneck for controlling access to the inner human systems. High Speaker Dreth Voshan had positioned over 2,000 warships here, reinforced by supply lines stretching back into Veldari space. He was confident. He was patient. He expected humanity to send a desperate little fleet of 40 or 50 ships to negotiate a surrender. And he was already composing the terms in his mind. Dreth Vashan did not know about Longbow Station. He did not know about the Shadow Fleet. He did not know about the modular weapon systems or the Colossus-class dreadnoughts. His intelligence reports told him that humanity possessed fewer than 50 combat-capable warships in total, most of them aging patrol vessels with outdated weapons. He had no reason to doubt those reports. Every species in the galaxy believed them. Humanity had spent 11 years making sure of that. The first sign that something was wrong came from a Veldari sensor outpost on the edge of the system. The officer monitoring the long-range array noticed a cluster of faster-than-light signatures approaching from the direction of human space. He counted them twice, then counted them again, then called his superior. The superior looked at the readings and felt something he had never felt before in his career. He felt uncertain. 312 signatures, all of them large. All of them moving in a formation so tight and coordinated that the sensors had initially read them as a single massive object. The report reached Dreth Vashan on the bridge of his flagship, the Throne of Silence. He read it and dismissed it as a sensor malfunction. Human ships did not travel in formations that large. Humans did not have formations that large. He ordered the outpost to recalibrate and report again. The outpost reported again. The numbers had not changed. If anything, they had gotten worse. The incoming fleet was now close enough for the sensors to resolve individual ship profiles, and what they showed did not match anything in the Veldari database. These were warships, real warships, built for one purpose and one purpose only. Dreth Vashan stared at the data, and for the first time in his long and ruthless life, felt the cold touch of doubt. Colonel Katie Morgan's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Gliese 667 system and immediately fanned out into attack formation. Katie stood on the bridge of the Iron Summit and studied the tactical display with the calm focus of a surgeon looking at an operating table. The Veldari fleet was arranged in a traditional defensive sphere around the system's central planet. Layers of ships stacked in concentric rings with the heaviest vessels in the center. It was a strong formation, proven over centuries of warfare. It was also exactly what Katie had expected. She opened a channel to Commander Derek Lane. "Derek, take the Vanguard in. Split their outer ring at coordinates 774. Make noise." Making noise was what he did best. His Vanguard group consisted of 60 fast frigates and destroyers, the lightest and quickest ships in the fleet. They surged forward in a wedge formation, engines burning at maximum output, and slammed into the outer ring of the Veldari sphere like a spear punching through a shield. The Veldari outer ring was made up of their lighter patrol ships, and they were not prepared for the speed and violence of the human assault. Derek's ships tore through them in minutes, their plasma cannons ripping holes in Veldari hulls, while their point defense systems swatted away return fire with mechanical precision. The outer ring shattered, and Derek's Vanguard punched straight through into the gap between the first and second defensive layers. Dreth Vashan watched the breach form on his tactical display and reacted quickly. He ordered his second layer to close the gap and surround the human Vanguard, trapping them inside the sphere, where they could be destroyed at leisure. It was a sound tactical decision, based on centuries of proven doctrine. It was also exactly what Katie wanted him to do. The moment the Veldari's second layer moved to close the gap, it created a thin spot on the opposite side of the sphere. Katie sent her main battle group, 200 cruisers and destroyers, straight at that weak point. They hit it like a hammer hitting glass, and the Veldari sphere cracked wide open. Now the battle became chaos, and chaos was where humanity thrived. The Veldari fought in rigid formations because that was what their doctrine demanded. Every ship had a position, every captain had orders, and deviation from the plan was considered a failure of discipline. When the formations broke, the Veldari captains struggled to adapt. They waited for orders from their superiors. They tried to reform their lines. They followed procedures that had been written for a situation that no longer existed. Human ships did not have this problem. Katie's fleet fought in fluid wolf pack formations. Small groups of 4 or 5 ships that operated semi-independently, picking targets of opportunity and supporting each other through constant communication. Lieutenant Commander Heather Dunn sat at the heart of this web, coordinating hundreds of simultaneous tactical conversations with a speed and clarity that would have been impossible for any other species. She fed information to every group, adjusted assignments on the fly, and kept the entire fleet moving as a single organism, even as the battle dissolved into 1,000 individual fights. And then there were the modular weapon systems. The Veldari had prepared for a certain kind of fight. Their shields were tuned to absorb plasma fire, which was the standard weapon type used by most species in the galaxy. When human ships opened fire with plasma cannons, the Veldari shields held. The Veldari captains felt a brief moment of relief. Then the human ships switched to kinetic batteries. It took 90 seconds. 90 seconds for the weapon systems to reconfigure, for the plasma cannons to retract, and the magnetic accelerators to deploy. 90 seconds, and suddenly the Veldari were being hit by tungsten slugs, traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Their shields, tuned for energy weapons, barely slowed the kinetic rounds down. Hulls crumpled, armor shattered. Ships that had been holding steady under plasma fire were torn apart by projectiles they had not expected and could not stop. The Veldari tried to adapt. They retuned their shields for kinetic impacts. The human ships switched back to plasma, then to torpedoes, then to focused beam weapons. Every time the Veldari adjusted, the humans changed again. It was like fighting water. Every time you built a wall, it found a new crack to pour through. At the center of the battle, Captain Nick Holland brought the Pale Horse straight at the Veldari flagship. The Throne of Silence was enormous, nearly 3 kilometers long, and its weapons were powerful enough to crack a small moon. Nick did not care. He had watched Kepler 442 burn from his bridge, and he had carried that fire inside him every moment since. The 2 dreadnoughts engaged at close range, trading volleys that lit up the void between them like a thunderstorm compressed into a bottle. The Throne of Silence hit hard, and the Pale Horse shuddered under the impacts. Armor plates buckled, compartments vented into space, but the Pale Horse hit back harder. Nick used the modular system to its fullest. He opened with plasma to force the Veldari shields to maximum, then switched to kinetic batteries to punch through them, then switched again to short-range cutting beams that carved into the flagship's hull like surgical tools. The Veldari could not keep up. Their systems were not designed to counter a ship that changed its entire weapons profile every 2 minutes. After 20 minutes of brutal close-range combat, the Throne of Silence went dark. Its shields collapsed. Its engines died. Its weapons fell silent. Nick could have destroyed it with a single volley. Instead, he held fire and sent a boarding team. High Speaker Dreth Vashon was taken alive on his own bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his command staff, his 6 eyes wide, with something that looked very much like fear. With their flagship captured and their High Speaker taken, the Veldari fleet lost its nerve. The rigid chain of command that held their society together snapped, and without orders from above, the individual captains did not know what to do. Some fought on, some tried to retreat, some simply stopped and drifted, waiting for instructions that would never come. Katie Morgan did not let them regroup. She pressed the attack, for another 3 hours, methodically breaking apart every remaining Veldari formation and driving the survivors toward the edge of the system. By the time it was over, more than 600 Veldari ships had been destroyed or disabled. The rest fled into faster-than-light travel, scattering in every direction like startled birds. Human losses were real. 41 ships destroyed, 60 more damaged, hundreds of crew members dead. Katie felt every loss like a weight on her shoulders, but she also felt something else, something that she suspected the rest of the galaxy was about to feel too. On the Athavarn Spire, the battle telemetry played on the main screen of the council chamber. 400 species watched in absolute silence as the fleet they did not know existed tore apart the most powerful military in the sector. When the recording ended, the chamber remained silent for a very long time. Counselor Sivan of the Orethi was the first to speak. She looked at the empty chair where Danny Caldwell usually sat, and she said quietly, "We should have listened." The galaxy did not change overnight, but it changed faster than anyone expected. In the weeks following the Battle of Gliese 667, the Veldari Dominion fell apart like a house built on sand. It had held together for centuries through a combination of military strength and fear, and when both of those things were stripped away in a single engagement, there was nothing left to keep it standing. Provincial governors declared independence. Client species that had been held under Veldari control for generations rose up and broke their chains. Fleet commanders who had survived the battle turned on each other, fighting over the scraps of an empire that no longer existed. The power vacuum sent shockwaves through the entire galactic political structure. Trade routes that had been stable for centuries were suddenly contested. Border agreements that had been enforced by Veldari warships were now just words on old documents. Species that had lived in the shadow of the Dominion for as long as anyone could remember were suddenly free, and most of them had no idea what to do with that freedom. On Earth, the mood was complicated. There was pride, certainly. The fleet had won a victory that would be studied in military academies for generations. But there was also grief. The colony at Kepler 442 was gone. Over 20,000 people had died in the attack, including the 12,000 who perished in the initial bombardment before Captain Holland could mount his defense. Names were read in public squares. Memorials were built. The western plains of New Haven, once golden with alien wheat, were now a scorched wasteland that would take decades to recover. Admiral Katie Morgan, newly promoted, supervised the recovery operations from her flagship. She had not slept properly in weeks, and the weight of command sat on her shoulders like a physical thing. Every report that crossed her desk carried a number, and every number was a person. 41 ships lost. Over 2,000 crew members killed. She knew the victory had been necessary. She also knew that necessity did not make the dead any less dead. Captain Nick Holland returned to Earth quietly. The military offered him a public ceremony, a parade through the streets of Washington, a medal presented by the president himself. Nick turned all of it down. Instead, he asked for a list of the families of every crew member who had died under his command at Kepler 442, the 8 ships he had lost during the evacuation. There were 347 names on that list. Nick visited every single one. He went to small apartments in crowded cities and farmhouses on empty plains. He sat in living rooms and kitchens and on front porches. He drank coffee with mothers who would never see their sons again. He held the hands of wives whose husbands were not coming home. He did not give speeches. He did not offer explanations or justifications. He simply sat with them and shared their grief, because he believed that the least a commander owed the people who died for him was his presence and his honesty. It took him 3 months. When he was done, he went back to his small apartment near the naval base, sat down in his kitchen, and cried for the first time since the battle. Then he washed his face, put on a clean uniform, and reported for duty. On the Athavarn Spire, the political transformation was already underway. Danny Caldwell walked into the council chamber for the first time since the battle, and the reception was very different from what he was used to. No one laughed. No one looked away. Every eye and sensor and organ in the room tracked him as he crossed the floor, and the whispered conversations fell silent as he approached the podium. The elder races had already prepared an offer. They wanted to elevate humanity to the senior tier of the council, granting them a permanent seat among the oldest and most powerful species. It was an extraordinary gesture, one that had not been extended to a new species in over 1,000 years. It came with voting privileges, trade advantages, and military alliance guarantees that would have made humanity one of the most influential civilizations in the galaxy. Danny listened to the offer politely. Then he declined. The chamber erupted in confusion. Ambassadors turned to each other in bewilderment. The Cathari representative actually stood up from his seat, something his species almost never did. Even Councillor Sivan looked surprised, though she hid it better than most. Danny waited for the noise to die down, and then he explained. He said that the problem with the Galactic Council was not that humanity had been placed at the bottom. The problem was that there was a bottom at all. The tier system, the hierarchy of power and age that determined which species had a voice and which did not, was the reason the Veldari had been able to attack Kepler 442 without consequence. It was the reason no one had come to help. It was the reason a species of 12 billion people had been treated as if their lives did not matter. The system itself was broken, and giving humanity a better seat at a broken table would not fix anything. Instead, Danny proposed a complete reformation of the Council Charter. No more tiers, no more rankings based on military strength or the age of a civilization. Every member species, from the oldest empire to the youngest spacefaring world, would have an equal voice and an equal vote. The Mutual Defense Compact would be rewritten with real enforcement mechanisms, so that no species would ever be abandoned the way humanity had been. The proposal was radical, and the reaction was immediate. Several of the elder races objected loudly. The Drenith ambassador called it naive. The Marathi representative called it dangerous. They argued that the hierarchy existed for a reason, that order required structure, and that giving equal power to young and unproven species would lead to chaos. Danny let them talk. Then he pointed out calmly and without raising his voice that the current structure had just allowed the most powerful military in the sector to slaughter civilians without consequence, while 400 species watched and did nothing. He asked them to explain to him how that was order. He asked them to explain how that was stability. He asked them to explain how a system that rewarded power and punished weakness was any different from no system at all. The chamber was quiet for a long time after that. It was Councillor Sivan who broke the silence. She rose from her seat and formally seconded the proposal. She said that her people had been ashamed of their inaction during the attack, and that if the council could not protect its weakest members, then it did not deserve to call itself a council at all. Her words carried weight. The Orethi were respected for their wisdom and their integrity, and when Sivan spoke, others listened. Over the next several days, more species came forward to support the Reformation. Many of them were mid-tier civilizations who had long resented the dominance of the elder races, but had never had the courage to say so. Humanity's victory had cracked the old order wide open, and through that crack, change poured in like sunlight. The reformed charter passed by a narrow margin. It was not unanimous, and the debate would continue for years. But it passed, and that was what mattered. Admiral Katie Morgan was appointed to lead a new joint defense initiative, a multi-species fleet that would ensure no member world was ever left to face an attack alone. She threw herself into the work with the same focused determination she brought to everything, building something new from the wreckage of the old. High Speaker Dreth Voshan was brought before the council to face charges for the unprovoked attack on Kepler 442. He stood in chains at the center of the chamber, where he had once mocked humanity from a position of supreme confidence. He was thinner now, and his 6 eyes had lost their shine. When he looked at Danny Caldwell, something passed between them that the translators could not capture. Dreth Voshan asked one question: "How did you hide so much for so long?" Danny's answer was simple: "You never thought to look." The trial lasted 2 weeks. Dreth Voshan was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to permanent confinement on a neutral world. He would spend the rest of his life in a small room, surrounded by silence, with nothing to do but think about the species he had underestimated. 6 months later, Danny Caldwell was standing on the observation deck of the Athavarn Spire, looking out at the galaxy. The view never got old. Billions of stars stretched out in every direction, each one a sun, each sun circled by worlds, and each world full of possibilities that no one had yet imagined. Counselor Saivan found him there. She moved quietly for someone so tall, and Danny did not notice her until she was standing beside him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars. Saivan asked if humanity had always planned for this outcome. If the hidden fleet, the secret preparations, the years of quiet patience had all been building toward this moment of reformation and change. Danny shook his head. "We planned to be left alone," he said. "We wanted to build our colonies, raise our families, and live our lives without anyone bothering us. That was the plan. But when the Veldari made that impossible, we made a new plan. We decided that if we could not be left alone, we would make sure no one could ignore us. And if we could not be ignored, then we might as well use that attention to build something better than what was there before." Saivan considered this for a moment. Then she asked, "And do you think you have succeeded?" Danny looked out at the stars and thought about Kepler 442. He thought about the western plains and the river and the bakery and the man reading a story to his daughter on a porch that no longer existed. He thought about the 347 families that Nick Holland had visited, one by one. He thought about the 41 ships and the 2,000 crew members who would never come home. Then he thought about the 40,000 people who had come home because Nick Holland refused to run. He thought about the Reformed Council and the Joint Defense Fleet and the dozens of species that were, for the first time in their history, being treated as equals. He thought about the future and all the things that might grow in the space that had been cleared by sacrifice and stubbornness, and the refusal to accept that small meant powerless. "Not yet," he said. "But we are getting there." Saivan looked at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her large, dark eyes. Something that might have been admiration, or wonder, or simply the recognition that the galaxy had changed and would never go back to what it was. "The galaxy will not forget, Ambassador," she said quietly. Danny smiled. It was a small, tired, honest smile. "Good," he said. "That is the point." They stood together on the observation deck and watched the stars turn slowly in the endless dark. 2 representatives of 2 very different worlds, joined by the simple understanding that the universe was vast and indifferent, and that the only thing that made it bearable was the stubborn decision to care anyway. Out there, somewhere among those billions of stars, the colony of New Haven was being rebuilt. The first transports had arrived a week ago, carrying volunteers and building materials and seeds for new crops. The western plains would be green again. The rivers would flow again. And this time, they would not burn. Because this time, the galaxy was watching. And the galaxy had learned that humanity did not forget, did not forgive easily, and did not ever give up. The Athavarn Spire was the largest structure ever built by any known species in the galaxy. It was a ring-shaped station that floated in the cold light of a dying red star, and it served as the meeting place for over 400 alien civilizations. Every species that had earned its place among the stars sent a representative here. Wars were ended inside these walls. Trade agreements were signed. Laws that governed entire star systems were written in its chambers. It was, by every measure, the center of the known universe. Danny Caldwell sat in the lowest row of the Great Council chamber and tried not to look bored. He was humanity's ambassador to the Galactic Council, and he had held the position for 3 years now. In that time, he had learned 2 important things. The first was that most alien species talked far too much. The second was that none of them took humanity seriously. He could not blame them entirely. Earth had only made first contact 11 years ago, when a Rethari trading vessel stumbled into the solar system by accident and nearly crashed into the moon. Since then, humanity had been granted provisional membership in the Council, given a small colonial zone of 5 star systems, and promptly forgotten. To the elder races, humans were children. They were a curiosity at best, and a nuisance at worst. Today, the Council was discussing expansion rights. The Veldari Dominion, a vast insectoid empire that controlled nearly a third of the galactic arm, wanted permission to claim several unclaimed sectors for resource extraction. Their high speaker, a tall and armored figure named Dreth Vashan, stood at the center podium and laid out his case with the calm confidence of someone who already knew the vote would go his way. The Veldari were rich, powerful, and deeply connected to the galactic economy. Nobody wanted to say no to them. Most of the proposed sectors were far from Earth's colonial zone and did not concern him. But one of them, a region near the Kepler 442 system, sat right on the edge of humanity's territory. Kepler 442b was one of Earth's earliest colony worlds. Over 60,000 people lived there. Families, children, farmers and teachers and engineers who had left everything behind to build something new among the stars. When the time came for objections, Danny raised his hand. The chamber went quiet, not out of respect, but out of mild surprise. The human ambassador rarely spoke. Danny stood and kept his voice steady. He said that humanity had no quarrel with the Veldari Dominion and respected their need for resources. But the sector bordering Kepler 442 was too close to an established human colony, and approving the claim could create future conflicts. He asked the Council to exclude that one sector from the proposal. Dreth Voshan turned all 6 of his eyes toward Danny and stared at him for a long moment. Then he made a sound that the translation system rendered as laughter. He said that humanity was a larval species still crawling from its cradle. He said that the galaxy did not rearrange itself to suit the comfort of infants. He told Danny to sit down. The chamber laughed, not all of them, but enough. Danny saw the amusement on faces and features of a dozen different species. He saw the way some of the elder ambassadors shook their heads, as if a child had wandered into an adult conversation and said something foolish. Danny did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He looked at Dreth Voshan and said 5 words. "We will remember this moment." Then he sat down. The Veldari got everything they wanted. 12,000 light-years away, on a blue-green world orbiting a quiet orange star, the colony of New Haven was settling into its evening cycle. The sun was going down over the western plains, and the sky had turned the color of ripe peaches. Children were playing in the streets of the main settlement. A woman named Grace was closing up her bakery for the night. A man named Carl was reading a story to his daughter on the porch of their small house near the river. None of them knew what was coming. In orbit above them, a small garrison fleet of 12 human warships kept a quiet watch. Captain Nick Holland stood on the bridge of the destroyer Ardent Vigil and sipped his coffee while reviewing routine sensor logs. Nick was 34 years old, calm by nature, and built like someone who had spent too many years in low gravity. He had been stationed at Kepler 442 for 8 months, and in that time, nothing interesting had happened. He was beginning to think nothing ever would. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Megan Price, was the first to see the anomaly. She frowned at her console and tapped the screen twice, thinking it was a glitch. Then she tapped it again. Then she stopped tapping and went very still. "Captain," she said, and something in her voice made every person on the bridge turn around. "I am reading multiple faster-than-light signatures inbound, a lot of them." Nick set down his coffee. "How many is a lot?" Megan looked at him, and he could see the color draining from her face. 900, sir. Configuration matches Veldari warships." The bridge went silent. 900 ships. The math was not complicated, and it was not kind. Before Nick could speak, the Veldari fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and filled the sky above Kepler 442b like a swarm of iron wasps. They did not send a warning. They did not make demands. They did not ask for surrender. They simply opened fire. The first volley hit the orbital defense platforms and tore them apart in seconds. The second volley reached the surface, and the western plains lit up with fire. The bakery where Grace had been closing up was gone in an instant. The river where Carl's house stood boiled away in a flash of superheated plasma. Nick watched the colony burn on his view screen, and something cold and hard settled into his chest. He turned to Megan and said, "Send the distress signal. All frequencies. Tell Earth what is happening here." Then he looked at his crew, 12 ships against 900, and said the only thing he could say. "All hands to battle stations. We are buying time." The distress signal left the Kepler 442 system at the speed of light, amplified by every relay station between there and Earth. It carried with it the screams of 60,000 people and the sound of a world dying. On the Athavarn Spire, Danny Caldwell was alone in his quarters when the message arrived. He read it once, then he read it again. Then he sat down on the edge of his bed and pressed his hands together and closed his eyes. He stayed like that for a long time. When he opened his eyes, they were dry. His face was calm, but something behind those eyes had changed. Something that had been patient and quiet for 11 years was now fully awake. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the council chamber. He had a speech to make, and this time, nobody was going to laugh.